Well, amazing. Thank you for having me in your home. Thank you for having me in your community.
Thanks for having me on your show.
No, this is the journey to get here has been, I can't think of the right word for it. Wild, crazy, amazing. Just, I can't even find the correct word to describe how our journey has almost come together and how we end up kind of sitting right here next to each other.
Yeah.
For people who are new or people who don't have context, my father first came to the United States. He went to University of Idaho, to Moscow, Idaho, which is the most random place for a Korean person to show up. And right next door to the house I was born, literally in the same duplex, you're a grad student there as well. Yeah. When I heard that story, my dad was so excited to tell me that story. He came running in. He's like, "Matt, you'll never guess what happened. You never guess who I just saw on Tucker Carlson." Because he told me stories about you growing up, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that time? If you could just kind of...
Well, I'm sure your folks have the same story, but different angles, different perspectives. But we were living in that duplex with a previous landlord. Your folks bought the duplex and moved in next door. So they were our landlords and our neighbors And I remember having a very brief conversation with them in the driveway there when we were just getting acquainted. And to me, it was a very low key, just, who is everybody? And I found out that they were nominal Buddhist. Right? Just nothing much to it, but just nominal Buddhist. I found out later from them that they thought it was a heavy duty conversation, like, whoa. But I thought we were just chatting. So we became friends, got along great. And I'm not sure, I may have been on the strength of that conversation in the driveway, but one day your father showed up at our door and he said, "Would you be willing to talk about Christianity to some Koreans?" And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And we had to work details out, and there was some to-ing and fro-ing. But the evening was set up at your place, in your living room. And I went over there, and the living room was packed full of Koreans.
I didn't know that.
Wall-to-wall Koreans.
Why are there so many Koreans doing it in Idaho and Moscow?
Usually studying the grad school, studying at the U of I. And I think your father, this is just something I picked up somewhere, I think your father was able to round them all up because he was the oldest one in Moscow and outranked everybody.
So the hierarchy.
There was a hierarchy. And so he said, so the living room was just full of Koreans. And your folks gave me the floor and said, "Tell the Koreans about start talking about Christianity." So I laid out the gospel, and some of them had a Christian background, but had drifted away from the Lord, and some of them were not Christians at all. But so I presented the gospel and laid it all out, and that event turned into a weekly Friday night Bible study. So what would happen is we went in the Bible study, we went through the Gospel of Mark, and we did that at our house. So all the Koreans would come over to our house, and I'd lead them in an inductive Bible study through the Gospel of Mark, and we would answer questions and talk about it and sit for a little bit after the study. And then your father would stand up, and everybody, so he was the senior Korean. He would stand up, and everybody would go next door. The whole Bible study, except for us, would go next door and debrief, talking about everything in Korean, right? So it was a wonderful, wonderful time where it was just the people who were not right with the Lord got right with the Lord, and people became Christians. In there, your folks became Christians, and we had delightful time in the Gospel of Mark. We also had some delightful cross-cultural times, right? Like one evening, I remember we got off onto animal sounds in different in English, a dog goes bow wow or ruff ruff, and they said it was wong wong.
Yeah, wong wong.
Wong wong. That's not right. Anyway, it was just a really good time. This is one of our favorites. I'll give you two favorite stories. Both involve food.
It's funny how food brings cultures and people together.
Yes. Well, one was a challenge because I was in a band, and I came home from band practice one night, and Nancy met me at the door because she was really concerned about this strange smell, unearthly smell that we didn't know. What is this? And we were hunting around. I was looking in the bushes out, is there a dead raccoon or something? I don't know. Anyway, we traced it finally to next door.
Yeah, Korean food stinks sometimes.
Cooking up some kimchi or something. Oh, okay. But the other time, the other food story was we were pretty poor, just students and just starting out and everything. And one time we were down to not very much money, not very much food, and a friend of ours who was in the law school here, he was a law student, called Nancy up and said, "Nancy, we're coming over to your house for dinner because we have macaroni and no cheese." So they were poor, we were poor. Nancy thought, well, I could maybe fry some eggs or something. We could do something. And so she was scrambling to do something. And then your mom asked my daughter, Becca, who was just a little kid, if she would like to come over and help learn how to cook some Korean food. And can we bring some over for you? And Nancy thought, well, she'll just give us a little taste of different things. Well, that evening, dish after dish, platter after platter showed up at the door. It was this huge Korean banquet for our impoverished friends who came over. It was sort of an answer to prayer right at the time. So the Lord did some wonderful things in our friendship with Chungwon and Kyung. It was just great. It was one of our, basically that whole time was part of our fondest memories of young married life.
Isn't it funny and interesting how the most random people from maybe all walks of life or all over the world can somehow converge on a simple idea of just being neighborly and looking out for each other and sharing culture.
Right.
And you come from different parts of the world. And somehow it's the genesis of something that's become so amazing here. This place that is kind of building and evolving around your mission. We've experienced it over the last 24 hours. It is phenomenal.
God is being very, very kind. But a lot of what's happening now is cumulative. It's the result of, it's a cumulative result of many, many years of preaching the gospel, sharing the gospel, living out the gospel. And the things that you picked up on being here in the last 24 hours, your parents were very much part of that story. Because it's cumulative. It matters. If you're not honoring God in the early stages, later on it's going to be way off track. If you honor God in the little things, the big oaks come from little acorns. And
they would tell me that their very first American Thanksgiving was at your parents' house.
Okay.
And they said before that they didn't even know what it was. Okay. They showed up and they have all these small memories of these small moments, small acts of kindness that kind of changed the way they perceived the world and vision forever. And when my father found out I was coming here, he was through the roof.
Well, please give my greetings to them.
So over the course of 40 years now, you started kind of in this small house, and it's become kind of a big endeavor. How do you think your perception of what God is like has changed? And how has your mission since that time kind of evolved?
Right. I think the first thing that comes to mind is there's a line in one of C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories where Lucy meets Aslan and she says, "Aslan, you're bigger." And he says, "No, I'm not bigger. You're older. You can see more of me." As as we've grown and matured and been taught lessons and been spared the consequences of stupid mistakes, God has been very kind to us over the years. It's the same basic truth of the gospel, only deeper, richer, fuller, but it's the same thing. It's like, wading in a pool and then discovering that it's thousands of feet deep. You go out, this same pond, same pool, but there are depths to it that you hadn't imagined.
Sometimes that drop off is sudden and fast.
Yes,
but
it's all the same water. So God is always good. God is good all the time. God is sovereign all the time. God is in control of every detail all the time. And we have had many, many instances where we have learned that lesson over and over again. He's the God of the little things, and he's the God of the big things, and he's the God of making big things come out of little things. And Jesus says this expressly. Jesus says he is faithful in a little, will be faithful over much. If you are responsible with the little tiny things that God gives you, he gives you more. And as God has blessed the work here, and it's grown far beyond our capacity to manage it individually. When the church was going, when your folks were here, I was the pastor, but it was a couple hundred people. It was a few hundred people, and I knew everybody.
They had mentioned a garage.
Yes, we met in. There are two garages actually, but we met in Green's Body and Paint Shop. The church started in 1975, and then I was done with school in 1979, and I'd begun pastoring it in 77. And in there somewhere, we'd met in East City Park outdoors and in a garage, in a person's garage, and in a community center. And then some friends of ours, some believers who go to another church, owned a body and paint shop, and they said, well, you can use our body and paint shop. And so we did. We'd go in there Sunday morning, and we'd push the cars out of the way and hose down the floor and set up chairs and hold our services there. And I remember joking with someone one time, we are the only congregation in North America where you could come to church, find a Rainier beer truck in the sanctuary, and not be surprised.
Well, and that's contrary to what people believe. People believe, especially these days, church is supposed to be extravagant and big and have cafes in the lobbies. And you guys don't do that.
We don't do that. The downside of this was that sometimes when we were having to hold little Sunday school classes off in the back rooms, we had to take down some of the calendars.
The evolution of church has been fascinating to watch over the last, especially 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
I want to say, I think for me, at least personally, because I wasn't always a big churchgoer.
Okay.
I think my parents were very involved in the church, and because of your work, they've become very involved. I spent maybe majority of my life kind of away from it. Not because I didn't want to believe, I don't know, the politics of it really bothered me. The weak leadership that I saw really bothered me. The constant fighting within church really bothered me. And it didn't feel like this was the way it was supposed to be. And because of that, I found myself kind of stepping away and not wanting to be a part of it. It seemed a little chaotic versus it's supposed to be loving and accepting, and it's supposed to be a leadership to help guide people. Right. And I didn't feel like I was getting that from church. Right. I think it felt a little hypocritical.
Okay.
But especially in the last few years and what the church has gone through during COVID, I think that was really eye-opening for me too.
Yeah. It says in Hebrews, God says in Hebrews that God specializes in shaking everything down so that what cannot be shaken may remain. So one of the things God does from time to time is he pressure tests his people. Difficulties arise or persecution arises or some sort of challenge arises. And what COVID did was, I think, reveal to many evangelical Christians that they did not have the leadership that they thought they had. They did not have shepherds who would fight to protect them. They didn't have what they thought they had. And we've had many people move here as a result of it, because there a lot of churches were told by the government, what you do is not essential. And the pastor said, okay, and
shut it down. And how is it abortion clinics are essential and pot shops are essential and porn's essential, but church is not essential? But then the worst thing is Christian pastors who agreed with that or capitulated to that. And then many of the people in the pews said, wait a minute, this is not right. I thought my leaders were more stalwart than that. You mentioned a minute ago the problem of infighting and infighting, and that's a real problem. But another problem, a corresponding problem, is shepherds who won't fight. Shepherds are not supposed to fight with sheep. Shepherds are supposed to fight wolves. And there's so I would say it's a two-pronged thing. There's too much fighting in the church. Infighting, sheep fighting sheep or shepherds fighting sheep. There's too much of that kind of fighting, and not nearly enough of shepherds fighting wolves. We live in dangerous times. We live in tumultuous times. Everything is up in the air. Everything's chaotic. As someone in the waning days of the British Empire, somebody once said, everything was at sea except for the fleet. Everything's up in the air. And in times like that, Paul says, when the bugle blows indistinctly, no one gets ready for battle. And Christians need decisive, strong, clear-headed leadership. This is what the Bible says. This is what the state is telling you. This is what we must do, instead of just who's to say, because that is just that's the relativism that's killing us. What do you think causes that, or why do you think that's a problem? I mean, for a lack of the word, or maybe it's the correct word, there seems to be a lack of masculinity amongst the leadership. And I think that's the problem, because when the government showed up and they said, you have to comply, everyone became megaphones for it. And it created kind of distrust, and the system created distrust when the people that you put your faith in to help guide you.
Right. And
people felt even more lost at a time where people were ultimate lost. Where does that come from?
So, huge question. I'll just give you a couple of big things that I think most of our modern problems in this area go back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century, and the whole modernity experiment, the whole secularism experiment, and all the isms. Fundamentally egalitarianism, which wants to flatten everything, that doesn't believe in hierarchy, that doesn't believe in authority, that wants to smash the patriarchy. And a lot of Christians went along with that sort of thing because we weren't in a time of crisis. Right? We had high standard of living. We were at peace. There was, you'd go out in the morning, the sky's still blue and the grass is still green. And I'm sort of drifting into a soft, woke feminism.
Good times create
weak men. And then the weak men don't know what to do when that ushers in the hard times, which is this is where we are right now. We're in the middle of hard times. And a lot of people are discovering that masculinity has its advantages. It's for something.
Masculinity is making a comeback.
Yeah, because it's necessary. A lot of what we're dealing with is the destructive impact of what is called luxury beliefs. When you have a lot of money, when there's discretionary income, when there's no invader on the border, you're not in the middle of a famine, you can start messing around with all kinds of stupid ideas, and you see someone clanking down the street, dog collar and jewelry everywhere. Jewelry ought to be, and Halloween hair and everything. The thing you ought to think is, I think we probably need a famine. We need hard times, because that is not useful. That's simply someone entertaining themselves. They are trying to find meaning, or they're trying to tattoo on themselves some kind of purpose. Well, Christians have purpose. We're baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that is an invitation to grow up into maturity in Christ. We have a map that has an X on it that says you are here. So a Christian who believes God's word is oriented. He knows where he is. He knows what direction he's supposed to go. He knows how to encourage other people to go in that same direction. And so we are in the middle of good times creating weak men. And we will see if the hard times that we're in the middle of will cause some men to step up and say, wait a minute, I'm done pretending that men can be women, or that women can be men, or that children can be adults. Or why do you want me to pretend all these crazy ideas?
You said an interesting word, which is famine. And famine refers to, do you think famine is the right word for where we are in society now?
A famine of the word of God, yes. And that's what Amos, the prophet Amos, talks about that. We are in a dark time, and pastors aren't shining the light. We are living in confused times, and pastors aren't showing the way. We are living in troubled times, and pastors aren't preaching the peace that's in Christ. So all the things that our society is flailing and doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what direction is up. They don't know. And the Christian church, which has the answer to all those questions, is whispering. And that's the shame.
Because I look around, and a lot of times, especially in these conversations, people like to blame the younger generations. They're so woke, they're so liberal, etc. But doesn't the responsibility fall on the leadership, because the leadership has created these types of problems?
Yeah.
Does the leadership have to change, or do we have to wait it out until the younger generation that is becoming stronger because of the weakness, do we have to wait for them? How fast of a transition, and how do we get there?
Yeah, I would say the older generation has no business blaming the younger generation, because I'd say, who educated them? Right. When I see mobs of Bernie supporters either, protesting or burning something down, or if I see that, I would say, where'd they go to school? Who paid for the tuition? Who built the school? Who was on the school board that hired all the teachers that taught them this? This didn't come from nowhere. It came from our grand experiment in secularism, which began in earnest probably in the Earl Warren years in the mid-20th century. Before that, there were secular noises, but the United States was still overwhelmingly Protestant and Christian in its default assumptions. And then in the latter half of the 20th century, the formal, rigorous pursuit of raw secularism began in earnest under the boomers. And the boomers are the ones who handed this legacy on. And you can't plant Canadian thistle and complain when you don't get a barley crop.
Idaho reference.
Yeah, Idaho. Yeah, danger. Yes. Oh, yes, we grow things here. And more than potatoes. So I think it's very much, I think all the generations are complicit in it. The boomers should not have set up the system they did.
Participation trophy culture.
That's exactly right. I'm a boomer, and I remember how I was educated. I remember the school system I went through and all the nonsense. Paul Simon, also in my age cohort, said famously, when I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all. Things were a mess back then, but it was a mess. It was like being 3 weeks pregnant, kind of a mess. If a woman is a single mom and she's pregnant and not showing yet, she's still pregnant, right? It's still headed for this difficulty. And what's now is we now come to term. We're ready. We're now having to deal with the actual consequences of all that cultural stupidity. And the central thing that I object to in all of it is the myth of secularism. We think that we can arrange our affairs, conduct our affairs without reference to God. And it turns out we're not capable of doing that. It turns out that without reference to God, we don't know the difference between a boy and a girl because we're not biologists.
So when you talk about church and government, a lot of people, especially people watching or listening, understand the premise that America as a country is lost, that maybe a move towards more conservative values is needed and necessary. But then people really get caught up on the separation of church and state. Everyone believes that they are supposed to be separate, that's designed to be separate. And the idea of maybe kind of merging them or having them running in parallel is a scary thought for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that question up because it's, I think in many ways, the central question of our age. And it might surprise people to know that I'm a strong advocate of the separation of church and state.
Which is contrary to what the internet will say.
The internet doesn't think, and certain individuals, and
they have a lot of choice words for you sometimes.
They think I'm a theofascist or that I want some sort of evangelical Protestant Iran with reformed ayatollahs, dictating. But
that's the vision people have in their mind when you talk about some sort of conjoining of the two.
Correct. But I'd argue this. The separation of church and state is a Christian theological development. Not only do I agree with it, but I would argue strongly for it. But I would distinguish. You have to distinguish this. You can separate church and state, and must separate church and state because they are both forms of government among men. This is men being governed around word and sacrament, around the preaching of the gospel. That's one form of government. And then the ministry of justice is the state. It's their job to make it possible for you to walk across town safely at 2 a.m. They're the ministry of justice. That's one kind of government. Church is another kind of government with a different task. And you can separate church and state because they're two different governments, just like you can separate apples and oranges because you've got 2 bowls and here's the counter and I put the apples in one and the oranges in the other. Okay, but that's a very different question than the separation of God and state or the separation of morality and state. How would it sound if someone said, I want to be governed by rulers who have no concern for morality at all?
I feel like we live in that society right now.
Right. I want rulers who do not fear God. I want rulers who will govern the United States without any reference to a moral code whatsoever. Now, that's not apples and oranges. What that is apples and freshness. Right? I want the apples to be fresh, and I want the oranges to be fresh. So if we had rulers who said, whether I kill you or not is a moral consideration, you're in my way, right? You're a threat to my continued holding of power. So if I can bring lawfare suits against you and imprison a political opponent, there's no moral consideration that's going to stop me. Right. So I would say, okay, that's a problem. So if I have if I want the president and I want the Congress and I want the Supreme Court to behave morally, well, whose morality? All of a sudden, that's a theological question. So I don't want to separate theology and state. I don't want to separate morality and state, but I do want to separate church and state. So this is one of the interesting things in the early colonial era. The various states would do things like this. I think South Carolina, one of the Carolinas, is the example I'm thinking of. Is in order to hold office in that state, you had to be a confessing Christian. Okay, it was they had religious tests for office. You had to be a Christian. You were also simultaneously prohibited from being a minister. Okay,
interesting.
So if I were alive in that in that time,
You wouldn't qualify.
I would be disqualified from being in the state legislature because they didn't want to mix church and state. Right. The minister is answerable.
The body of church and the body of
the state. They didn't want to mix the apples and oranges. They wanted the ministers to stay over there, and they wanted the legislators to stay over here. But they wanted the whole thing to be Christian. So there's a very sharp difference between what I would describe the informal Christian consensus, the informal Christian establishment that we had from the founding, and it was overwhelmingly Christian, and it did not lead to Handmaid's Tale, women in red dresses, that sort of thing at all. And we perfected the whole idea of the separation of church and state. But it's not the same thing as the separation of morals and state.
So if you're building a government and you want to be inclusive, because there are other religions, there are other ideas, that would be difficult for some people because you would say only Christian, but people say, well, a lot of the country is not Christian. The idea is that certain people that, even if they're not aligned in the same religious values, they may have similar moral values. For example, a devout Muslim or a devout Hindu could possibly be good moral people, hardworking people. Would you consider them to be a part of that same structure then? Or because of certain fundamental differences in ideology, it's still too far of a gap to close?
One of the things
versus maybe an atheist who doesn't believe any of it.
Right. One of the things my dad used to say is that God takes you from where you are, not from where you should have been. Right. And one of the things we have to deal with is, as we labor for reformation here in the United States, we have to deal with the facts on the ground. Who's already here? Who's already here? Who's been here for generations? What are we going to do? And you don't pull an ex post facto business where you start unwinding, breaking your word and doing that sort of thing. But if you're asking, so you have to start where you are, and that includes Muslims and Hindus and Jews and people who are not Christian. But and I understand that some people are not going to believe me on this, but I have stronger faith in a Christian accommodation of a Muslim's rights than I would of if I were a Christian in a Muslim society. So a Muslim living here, let's say we got our way, and let's say we had a Christian governance. I believe that we would treat the Muslims right. I don't believe that the Muslims, if I were in Saudi Arabia, I don't believe Christians would be treated the same way. Right. So I trust us to take care of the Muslims better than I trust the Muslims to take care of us. And since governing decisions cannot be neutral, there's right and wrong, and it's wrong to fly airplanes into skyscrapers. I don't care if Allah told you to do it. That's wrong. And so you have to come down and say, if we are going to ground our laws on the will of God, someone's going to say, well, yeah, but which God? And I would say, well, the true God, the true God. But the true God is not going to demand that we start wronging people who don't know him yet. Right. So I believe that it wouldn't be the way it is now, where it's just a pandemonium, but chaos, where anybody can do whatever they want. But in an ideal Christian republic, I don't see any problem with a Muslim living there or owning property or having his rights respected in court and all of that. But what he wouldn't do is be legislating on the basis of the Quran. That's the area where I'd say no, we're not going to do that. We're going to be a Christian people, and if you want to accommodate yourself to the way we do things here, then great. But that leads us into another hot button issue, which is immigration, because for many, many years the United States did a very good job of assimilating immigrants from all over the world and assimilating them into the basic Anglo-Protestant ethos that was America. And the assimilation worked. The chaos on the border now means that we're swamping the lifeboats, and they're coming in too fast. It's not the problem. It's not people are coming in. The problem is that they're coming in too fast for us to assimilate. And what's going to happen is just ethnic chaos, ethnic clashes. So whether it's Hindu or Muslim or people coming from all over, I think would be and should be welcome in a Christian republic, but not by the metric ton, not by the millions.
Just flooding over.
Not the flooding over. Right?
I think a lot of even immigrant families that are here, they see what's going on at the border, like, no, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah,
there's a process. A lot of people that are here followed the process, did what they felt was the right way to do it. The rules of the game were laid.
Right.
This is what we did at door. We try to follow the rules, and you see this flooding. You're like, wait a second, why did we do it the right way for all of these years?
Right.
And it puts a distrust in the system, distrust in the laws.
Right.
It makes you want to not even follow them.
And so when people talk to me about this, I say, I'm not anti-immigration. I'm anti-chaos.
Yeah.
I'm anti-anarchy. I'm in favor of immigration because I don't want to build a wall that keeps everybody out. Absolutely, is a wall that can keep everybody in. Also, right? And I distrust our government. I don't think that. I don't want to give them powers to exclude every alien because that also gives them power to monitor every citizen. And I just want to be careful about that. And so my concern is for the rule of law, not the anarchistic come in by the million annually.
In the last year or so that I've been doing this, I've been able to get close to a lot of people within politics, within leadership of the country. And the word that comes to mind when I think about the people that are in charge of our world and society, it would be unimpressive. Extremely unimpressive, make decisions on our behalf for our lives, make decisions for what affect basically not only ourselves, but future generations. And it's not only that they're impressive, they're not intelligent, they don't care, they're self-serving. How do you change that?
Right.
Because it's an entire class of people that just don't care about the populace at all.
Right.
And there's such a separation between how people really live and view the world versus the people that we elect, very loose word, that we elect, that are chosen to rule society.
Right.
How do you close that gap?
So
if we go the way we're going, I don't think we're almost at that point of no return.
Right. And if something doesn't happen, we are at that point. And this is something I said to, in the Tucker interview, and I'd like to say it again and maybe add something that I wish I thought of this after. I wish I'd said it during that interview. I said, where we are now, there is no political solution. Okay. We might have an election that makes everybody happy for 15 minutes, or half the people happy for 15 minutes. But I think we are such loggerheads. There are two Americas, completely alien worldviews, and they hate each other. It's inflamed. It's a bad situation. I don't think there's a political solution. I don't think that politics is a savior, but I do think that politics needs to get saved. Okay. Right. Politics is not a savior, but the political process needs help, just like the rest of us just like the rest of our culture needs help. And this is why I'm interested in preaching the gospel. This is not to discount the need for courageous leadership, the need for legislators and executives who love God to stand up and do what is right. I'm grateful for them. But I don't believe that we are in a condition where if half our governors and half of our state legislatures suddenly discovered a backbone and suddenly started making good laws and and making good sense, I think that would bring the country into a condition of revolt. Because I think there has to be courageous leadership from the top, but there also has to be preparation in the people, in the populace from below. And this is why John Adams, our second president, said that our Constitution presupposes a moral and a religious people. It is wholly unfit to govern any other. And since we are not a moral and religious people right now, our Constitution is not an adequate framework for governing us. Now, I don't want some other dictatorial framework. I don't want some dictator to come in and play hardball. So what do I do as a minister? Well, the call is for reformation and revival. Pastors need to preach Christ. They need to say, look into the camera and speak into the microphone and say, it's Christ or chaos. That's the alternative that America is facing right now. It's Christ or chaos. And if someone were to say, well, no, I can be a secularist and not devolve into chaos, and I'd say, look at your news feed. What's going on? Wake up. If it was possible back in the Eisenhower years for someone to say, well, I believe that we can be secular and govern ourselves decently and morally without reference to God. And you could look around and that was hard to refute back then. But it's pretty easy to refute now. We cannot govern ourselves. We need to repent of our secularism, and we have to, and preachers, this is the thing. Paul says in Romans, how will they hear without a preacher? Preachers have to grow a spine. Preachers have to say, I'm not going to have any problem passages. I'm a Christian pastor. I've been ordained to preach the word. I've been told to preach the word in season and out of season. That means I should preach it when people want to hear it, and I should preach it when people don't want to hear it. And in my ministry, there were times when the radical things I was saying were largely ignored. You're on the margin. You're just,
extremist.
You're extremist. That handy word, ultra.
Ultra. The ultra conservative.
The ultra conservative. But I've noticed something just in the last 5 years. Two things have happened. One is that rank and file Christians are starting to listen. They're open to a radical message. And radical doesn't mean bomb throwing. Radical simply comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. So a radical proposal is a proposal that goes to the root of the matter. If Christ is Lord, follow him. If he's not, don't. But if Christ is not Lord, where are we going to go? Well, I can only see one option on the menu. It's Christ or chaos. We continue to spiral downward into the outer darkness. And so I want to preach Christ, and I want to call on other ministers to preach Christ, and not preach Christ in an airy-fairy way where, okay, Christ has got a special cubbyhole for you in the sky after you die. It's true. I believe in heaven. I believe in the resurrection. But Christ is also the Savior of the nations. He's the Savior of the world. And so the ethnic tensions that are tearing you apart, the economic stupidity that's sinking you, the environmental stupidity that's all of those things. Christ is Lord. He's given us a book. We should study that book and then tell the people what it says.
So in thinking of leadership, there are a lot of God-fearing, successful, hardworking, family-oriented people out there in the world that would probably be really good leaders of society. And anytime you talk to any of them, they're like, I would. Like, you should run for office. You should get involved in the process. And most say, I would, but I kind of have a lot going on right now. How often do they say that?
Yeah.
I have my business, I have employees, I have my family. Getting in politics can be messy. I don't want to put that burden on my family. We don't want to live in that type of public eye. It's okay to be famous, but to live with the political pressure, the political fame, it's a different world.
Yeah.
And because of that, strong, faithful, hardworking men, they're scared of that. How do you convince them that they need to get involved? Because really, isn't that part of the problem? Is that the people that would do phenomenal at the job choose not to. And it's a choice.
Yeah, it's a choice. And there's an irony in it, because the choice they're making to to start a business and to provide for their family and to make sure their kids, doing well. All of those things are good things. And this is, I don't care anymore. This is a politically incorrect joke, but I heard this joke first at Obama's first inauguration. There was, I don't know how many million people, a million people at Obama's inauguration, but it was okay.
We are change.
Because only 17 people had to miss work. All the people with jobs are not out there running other people's lives.
Took me a second.
Conservatives have jobs and responsibilities, and they're busy, right? Oftentimes, the busy bee progressives, the liberals, don't, and they've got plenty of time and to spare to involve themselves in running other people's lives. And the conservatives have a real distaste for that, and they're very busy on top of it. And all of those things are virtuous things in their own right. But I do believe that we have to acknowledge that in a small municipality like Moscow, in city government, there are all kinds of committees that a conservative Christian man would rather have 3 root canals than sit on that committee listening to dumb stuff all day. And I think of a great Thomas Sowell quote. He said, nothing should be entrusted to people who like going to meetings. Right. And that's part of the divide. But I think it's one of the sacrifices that people have to start making, getting involved at the county level, getting involved at the local municipal level by being willing to serve on committees and give time back to the community that way, and don't put up with nonsense. Solzhenitsyn's great line, live not by lies. Don't, if it's dumb and stupid at the local level, vote no. But I do think that we have to get more involved.
I think there's, it's almost a selfless sacrifice that you have to make. And the people who are most successful, maybe they have the most to sacrifice. But it's hard. Is that a pride issue? Is that a doubt issue? Is that fear? I mean, what do you think it is that really keeps people away from making that decision? Because I think a lot of people have that in their hearts, that I'd like to get involved. I think I've met countless people that I would consider extremely successful. So I would love to do it, but they don't.
Yeah. I would say largely it's, I don't detect fear or that sort of thing. It seems mostly that I don't want to go to that stupid meeting and be exasperated for an hour and a half at all the things they're put out. My son Nate has formulated a law that I think should be given a name. The law is, in any meeting that goes over 20 minutes, someone will propose something which, if implemented, will ruin everything. And so there are people, the man who started his own business, he's a go-getter, he's a self-starter, he's intelligent, he makes decisions. He doesn't want to go into a bureaucratic, rapidly cooling magma flow where it would just shoot me. He'd say, "Shoot me now." I'd say it's a lack of patience that is. No, that'd be too exasperating, I think.
So you've built out a very large organization. It encompasses education, church, community, not only here in Moscow, but kind of all over the country now.
Right.
What has been kind of the biggest pitfall in growing such a large organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. The biggest challenge, and the thing that I'm good at, and it has a dark side, because the thing that I'm good at is the same thing that I'm bad at. All right, if that makes sense. I believe that I'm good at delegating, where I'll have an idea, I'll start something, I'll plant the seed, get it up and going, and then turn it over. Okay. And delegate. And that has been a strong suit because I can't do it. I can't do all this stuff.
Time is limited, resource
I
limited.
can have an idea, I can plan it, I can help during liftoff. So when it comes to ministry and education and publishing, things like that, I've got an entrepreneur's brain, but I'm not a maintenance guy. I'm not an administrator. And so the strength is delegating, finding someone and turning it over. So that's the strong suit. The weak side of that is that when you turn it over, right? And sometimes people crash it, or sometimes it's crashed, or there's mission drift, or it starts to veer off, and you can't turn it over and not turn it over at the same time. So the thing that I'm good at is the impulse to, I need to turn this over. The thing that I need to get better at is turning it over in such a way as to maintain mission faithfulness after it's turned over. Now, God has been very kind. Most of the things I've started have stayed mission true, but not all of them. And there's been lessons learned in that.
You said mission faithfulness, someone that aligns with your core values, at least. Is it more important? Is it possible to bring in someone that may be very competent in the kind of the project that you start? Is that more important to find someone that has history and does that well, or someone that believes in what you do and they can learn to do what you want them to do well? Yeah. Where's the priority there?
That's a really great question. It points to, let's say, if we look back at Trump's first administration, this would be the front and center issue. From all the reports I get in Trump's administration, there were the true blue Trump's my man, and they didn't have the craft competence to know how the system worked, but they were loyal to him. And then there were the people who knew how the system worked. They were career operatives, but they weren't loyal to Trump or his program at all. So you had the maintenance guys, the old guard, and they would undermine the things that he wanted to do. And then the people who were true to him personally didn't have the wherewithal to make it happen. So it's really important to pray for and cultivate and train for a fusion of the two, where people are loyal to the mission and they have craft competence. They know how to do the job. And I would prefer, so if I had to choose loyal or competent, I'd choose loyal because, but I wish that were not the choice.
Wish we had both.
Yeah, we really need both.
But usually people are one or the other. Yeah. They completely buy into your mission, completely buy into what you're trying to do. A lot of times they don't have the technical skills or kind of the know-it-all to maybe pursue exactly the vision that you had in your mind. And then the other side is they know exactly what you wanted. They know exactly how to execute. And there's huge value in that. Yeah. Because it's easier for you. There's less stress for you. The chance of failure.
Yeah.
Which do you think fails more? The ideologue that buys in completely but has no understanding of the technical aspect, or the person who does have the technical knowledge, but just doesn't buy in?
Yeah, I would say the person who doesn't buy in but has the technical knowledge is they both fail, but one fails more seriously. The one with the technical knowledge who doesn't buy in is the person who steers it. It's like someone says, I don't know that I want to vote anymore. No matter how I vote, the government always seems to get in. So nothing really changes. I have a friend, an acquaintance who worked in the Trump administration, who told a group of us that Trump gave an order to some functionary down in the bureaucracy, I'd like you to do this. And he said, no. And what are you going to do? And he knows how to sandbag and manipulate and steer. So the people with craft competence can destroy your mission and make it look like they're not. Right? The person who's a loyalist and incompetent is probably going to go up in a grease fire. Everybody's going to know that failed, right? But at least we know it failed.
Easier to deal with.
It's easier to deal with because you know that you have cleanup to do. My entire adult life, I've been dealing with Republican candidates who run right and govern left, right?
Common theme these days.
What's that?
It's a common theme these days.
It's a common theme and so they talk a good game, and when it comes to getting elected and getting positions of power, they know the ropes. And one of the ropes they know is how to sound like a conservative when you're not actually accomplishing that mission.
How do you know? Because you'll meet people that will come up and say, I want to get involved. I want to help out with your mission. And they say maybe they're all the things that you want to hear. It's very deceptive. It's hard to see it because even if I'm the person hearing it, that's what I wanted to hear. They're from like, oh, this is exactly who I was supposed to be with.
Right.
It's very hard to decipher that. How do you figure that out?
So depending on the position you're hiring for, these questions would vary. But I think in every application or every job interview, there needs to be a set of questions where the applicant doesn't know the expected answer. Right? When they know how, when they're applying for, if they want to work in a congressman's office or you're starting up a company and they want to come work for you, they know how to Google your name and find your interests. And anybody with that kind of intelligence can prep for the interview. Right. And I have a passion for XYZ, which is what you just read on his Wikipedia page, that he has a passion for XYZ. I think the person is doing the hiring. I'll give you just one example. In my position at Logos School, our job application had a section. Please list 3 books that you've read in the last year, not connected to any class assignments. Books that you've read on your own free time. Books that you've read for your own personal enjoyment. I learned way more from the answers to that question than I did from all the standard boilerplate questions. So what if you're hiring, where do I would ask an applicant, where do your kids go to school? Right. And in fact, probably a good 2/3 of the questions I would ask are probably illegal to ask.
That's the tricky part these days.
Yeah. What's your favorite band? Or can I see your Spotify playlist? There are things that I think you ought to look at things where they don't know how to configure the answer.
There are a lot of people out there that are really good at that though, especially these days. People are getting better at understanding the psychology of people, human interaction. It's completely different. We have a segment of society that is completely lost in social interaction, don't know how to ask questions, don't know how to engage, don't know each other. Then you meet the person that seems very competent at that. And it's like, wow, they get it. And that's the most deceiving part, right? Yeah. Because that's something that you really have to be careful of. Right. And it's so hard to pick people around you.
It is very, very challenging, yes.
Of the people that you've built and you've built an organization, and say you do let someone around your circle that you find out this guy is a snake, this guy's not supposed to be here. Is it better to try to align them back to your values, or do you have to cut it off right away?
Right.
How do you deal with those situations?
I love your questions. Before my dad went to be with the Lord, we were having a Sabbath dinner one evening, and one of my kids asked him, "Do you have any regrets, Grandpa, looking back over your life?" I think he was in his late 80s at the time. He went to be with the Lord when he was 94. And he said, "Yes, I should have fired more people sooner." And what my dad did, he would open Christian bookstores, and they were evangelistic outreach bookstores. And he's basically one of the things I think we should be looking for is a fail quickly model, where you find out quickly if this is going to work or not. And if you get someone on board and you discover that they're not doing the job, it might be because they're a snake. It might be because they don't have the tools. Okay. If you've concluded that they're on the other team, then don't drag it out. Just they need to be gone. If the person doesn't have the tools, you make a good faith effort once or maybe twice to equip them with the tools. And if they're eager for it, then great. They can acquire the tools and go on. But if it looks like you're going to have to drag them across every line, you don't ever want to be, basically, once you know that this is not going to work, delay always makes it worse. Okay. So let's say we hire a teacher, and halfway through the fall, we think, we got some challenges in that class. You do what you can to equip them. But as soon as you know this is not going to work, you don't want to perpetuate it. Until you know, you want to extend grace and that sort of thing. But as soon as you know this is not good, it'd be far better to act quickly. And that's hard because, at least in Christian organizations where I'm operating, there's sort of an automatic tenure. Everybody wants to continue to employ everybody because we all love Jesus. Well,
that's a hard part too, right?
That's the hard part. Yeah.
I'm supposed to be accepting. I'm supposed to be understanding. I'm supposed to be forgiving.
Right.
But then when you mix that weird impasse between business culture and Christianity, and when it comes to the head, how do you figure that out?
Well, basically, you don't ever want to set the Christianity aside, because you don't ever want to perpetuate a wrong where you double cross someone or break your word, because Christianity is always senior. But there's the teaching or the law of Christ or the word of God is senior, which is not the same thing as Christian-y vibes being senior. Because evangelicals are nice people. That's our besetting sin.
Polite.
Nice, polite. We want to jolly everybody along. And that's not the law of God being senior. That's our evangelical subculture of politeness being senior, which it isn't. So the business concern, the mission concern should come before that, right? Your business concern is under the authority of the Word of God, but Christian subculture assumptions about how everybody should be sweet to everybody, that is subordinate to your mission.
As kind of your network of people has grown over the last 40 years, and you're picking up people in different areas, how are you able to manage, reach out, keep everyone energized, keep everyone focused, keep everyone purpose-driven, especially because people are so separated now? And the obvious answer is, well, technology helps, but I have a huge problem with technology. Maybe we can get into that next. But it's not easy to keep people focused and on vision. And it's easy for a person to get lost in their own lives and whatever else is going on. But you have a clear mission on what you're trying to achieve. How do you keep people aligned with your mission?
The best way I know how to summarize that is a phrase that occurred to me one time. It's pull, don't push. Pull, don't push. I don't think it's leadership to be, come on, try to get people activated. The best thing in the world to do is to get in front and blow down the road. So this is what we're doing here. And I'm going to, if you're towing a car behind your truck, you want to tighten the tow rope. You want to be pulling, not pushing. So I think leadership is a matter of casting vision and then putting yourself in that place first. So we have New St. Andrews College, we have Logos School, we have ACCS, we have Canon Press, we have Christ Church. We have all these different operations, and I'm very much involved with all of them. But I would see my role as articulating a vision and sort of getting out front and saying it, and saying it in such a way that people want to follow behind. It's like going over the top. You go show them what you're talking about. Don't sit in your office writing critical notes of how they didn't take the initiative. You want them to take initiative, you take initiative. You show them how it's done.
Maybe hitting on technology.
Yes.
Technology is an odd one because I've searched. I can't find iPhone in the Bible anywhere.
Yeah.
So there's no reference for kind of the new technology and new society that's been created in the last 10 years.
Yes.
We can't live without technology. And the funniest part is the oldest generation who said, we don't need technology. We don't need technology. This is crazy. No one's going to use the internet. They're the most addicted to phones.
Right.
I'll walk in and my mom will be like, she never used her phone. And now I go in there and she's just all day long. It's like, oh, I got to take a picture. I got to put it on Facebook. It's like, Mom, if you post it 3 hours later, no one knows. No, they know. I got to put this picture up now. We rely on it so much. It's become a huge part of our lives. I think it's jading our view on reality. I think it's a huge problem for the future generation because they don't think for themselves. I think even people within the populace now, they don't want to think for themselves. They want someone to tell them how to think.
Mm-hmm.
How do you separate that? And how does God think about technology and our adoption of it?
This is one of my happy questions. Because going back to how you put it at the beginning of there's nothing in the Bible about technology. Well, I regard technology as a form of wealth. And if you said, is there anything about wealth in the Bible? Yeah, there's an awful lot about wealth. So technology is, so if I've got iPhone and that iPhone basically has 100,000 servants on it. I can have an Anglo-Saxon scholar servant on it. I can have a Latin translation servant on it. I can have a map guy, navigator on it. I can, I've got all these servants.
Entertainers.
Jesters. Cat videos. I've got all these servants on this phone. And Nebuchadnezzar would have given half of his Babylonian kingdom to have one of these things. Right. And everybody's walking around with one in their pocket, right? High school kids. So it's like this. I would regard it not only as wealth, but as extreme wealth. Okay. Now, what the Bible teaches about wealth is that it is not inherently wicked, but there's a bias towards self-sufficiency and forgetting God. So in Deuteronomy 8, in fact, all through Deuteronomy, wealth is God's gift to the people of Israel, and wealth is the thing that's going to tempt them to stray from Him. So God gives us gifts, which if we abuse, we drift away from Him, and that's what's happening with this technological wealth. I can't believe the things I can do with my Bible search program.
I searched iPhone; it didn't show up.
Right. But I could have told you that. So I can't believe the tools that are just, and I love them. At the same time, there's a temptation that the human heart has to drift away from dependence on God because of our wealth. So at the end of Deuteronomy, it says, Jeshurun waxed fat and kicked. Cotton Mather, the Puritan writer, said, faithfulness begat prosperity, and the daughter devoured the mother. So faithfulness causes prosperity, and the daughter prosperity devours the mother. Well, that's the way it is with technology. I want to make sure that I'm not burning daylight with technology, just scrolling. And I want to make sure that the technology that I take up is a force multiplier for my productivity, which it has been. So I've got this thing on this word processor. I can click this thing and dictate to it. I don't have to type. I can read a quotation out of a book, and it just, okay, that is a gift from God. But if we start to think like the tech execs in Silicon Valley do think, that they are God, right? That's where everything goes seriously wrong, and where people are just sucked into the world of tech, and they're not receiving it with thanksgiving. They're not using it to remind them to pray. They're not using it to, if someone says, I'm standing in line at the post office and I'm doing my Bible reading, well,
amazing.
That's great. That's wonderful. And people, if you look at a family that goes out to dinner and everybody's sitting around the table in the restaurant on their phones.
Very commonplace these days.
And you say, well, okay, something's wrong with that. But if you had a family, like one of the things, back in the day when in the 70s, pre-internet, pre-iPhone, pre-all that, I'd go to work and Nancy had a phone at home with a cord attached to the wall. And I had a phone in my office, and we would talk maybe once a day, and I'd come home maybe at lunch, maybe in the evening. And now with kids and grandkids and people all over the place, we have a family chat group with Nancy and me and the adult kids. We also have an extended chat group with all the grandkids, the whole family. And if someone's shopping in Spokane, they can send a picture. Hey, do you want me to pick this up for you? Our people are chatting with one another all day long. It's like we're together all the time. So you can take the technology and use it to isolate yourself from your people, but you can also take the same technology and use it to tie yourself in a tighter bond with your people. So now, of course, there's sometimes it will be one thing and it will look like another. Like you and your wife been on the road all day, and you sit down in a restaurant and you both are on your phones, and you have to make a joke to the waitress. We're not texting each other. Well, what we're doing is we're catching up on our email, and because all the people back home done it. Is this cultivating relationship with actual people, or is it pushing you further and further into your cocoon where you're just isolated?
And technology is tough, especially the consumption of technology, especially the consumption of things like news and information about the world around you, because the algorithm serves you almost what you want to see. It's really hard to know kind of what's on the other side. You don't know what's outside of your own individual matrix, right? We have procured information, and we live in our own digital ghettos, right? We don't know what's on the other side. So we live via confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is everything. Now, I listened to him because a lot of people listen to him. Oh, this must be a legitimate take because look how many people looked at this.
Right.
And the tech overlords can decide this is important. We'll just make a lot of people look at it. Right. All of a sudden that becomes law, that becomes rule, that becomes the way people think and perceive. I think a lot of what we do is just try to question everything all the time. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. It's just to encourage people to start thinking for themselves.
Right.
Because our minds are so fragile, so easily molded. We're seeing that more now than ever. The mass psychosis of COVID was a real thing. People blindly complied with no rational or logic whatsoever. How do you think people can stay away and keep free from kind of this control that you can't see, you can't feel it, but people know it's going on? Right. Inherently, you know.
Right. So the bad guys are always going to want to manipulate and control the populace. So when I was a kid, there were 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and usually one local station, right? And that's just the way it was. And it wasn't confirmation bias in the sense that I got fed the stories I wanted to see. I only saw the stories they wanted me to see, right? So everybody was sort of force-fed a certain way. And now that we've got this radical liberty to go to our own news aggregator websites and so on, you're very right. The tech overlords have figured out a way with the algorithms to feed you more and more and more of what you want. And I think that we have to fight that and find responsible news aggregator sites that will feed from different directions. And we have to self-consciously work on that. But it's not like this is a new thing. The masters of the lords of the earth have always wanted to control public opinion. And they've done that from time immemorial. And with the advent of the tech world and AI, they're going to use that. And I think we ought to be having people looking to write algorithm busters and, AI disruptors.
I think I saw a talk, I think it was Jack Dorsey, and he said that he believes people should have the ability to choose their own algorithm so that you're not forced into a main algorithm, but you can choose at least the matrix in which you're served. Because at least there's a little bit of freedom of choice there. Right now, you go on to your Instagram or your TikTok, your Facebook, whatever you doom scroll in, because everyone's got preferred doom scroll device. They choose for you what you see, and they say it's based on your preference, but it's really not. It's chosen, not selected. He had the idea that maybe you should be able to choose your own matrix, that you choose your reality. It's almost like a story is written and you choose your own adventure,
right?
But it's a different way of looking at it. I never considered that before, the ability to choose your own algorithm. Or is it better that we just don't have algorithms and we just give back people freedom of choice?
Yeah, but if you want to ban algorithms, then you have to have an algorithm czar who is
going to regulate that.
Is going to regulate that. And I would bet you $10 that he's going to have his own algorithm going.
Only $10?
Yeah. Well, yes.
I think that's the hardest part, especially. So we have a daughter. So she is going to be 2 years old. Beautiful, best thing that ever happened to me. When I look at people when you have a child, all of a sudden the people in your immediate network happen to be parents with children that same age. That's just naturally how it works. And as I look around, most of the kids, even at that young age, are addicted to phones. All they do is look at their phones. And then I look, well, what are they even looking at?
2-year-olds?
2-year-olds. 2-year-olds are addicted to their phones. And at that age, I'm like, what are you looking at? And I'm kind of peeking. Even the content that they're served, parents are like, well, it seems really innocent, seems really nice. It's so hard to find them good, conservative, strong Christian valued content. It doesn't exist out there because the ones that are available, they're so much better. They're snappier. Kids watch it longer. They put entire psychology and science behind making sure your kid watches for the maximum amount of time. They're conditioning children from the day they were born at this point. And if you start them at 1 or 2 years old, there's no way they're going to break free at 15, 16, 17, 18. It's way too gone. Right. It becomes an inherent part of how they view the world.
Yeah.
How do you combat that?
Well, move to Moscow, Idaho.
The kids here aren't watching their phones at 2 years old.
Well, no.
Grandkids don't have iPads at 2?
No,
they'd be outliers.
my grandkids, for example, my son, I forget the exact age, but his kids don't have social media accounts. And so I just got an email from our Logos school is the school, our K through 12 school, and they are looking seriously at moderating, restricting phone use in high school, right? So you don't want, and what they're starting with is communicating with parents, giving school recommendations. I would say things like no social media accounts through high school. You can look at what your friends are posting, but not you can't post, because teenagers oftentimes their whole identity gets wrapped up in that, and their value is based on whether they got likes for the outfit or whatever. I think the best gift you could give to your kids is equipping them to be technologically capable, but not culturally dependent on their devices. And so I believe that sort of thing is going to have huge educational ramifications. The 2-year-olds on iPhones, I find wild and appalling.
But it's a crutch for parents.
Right.
A lot of stuff going on in life. Everyone's busy. People seem to get busier. I don't know why we incorporated all this technology into our lives to simplify our lives, but yet somehow we're busier.
Yeah.
We have all these things to make your life easier, but yet we seem to have less time.
Right.
In reality, we're losing our time to the doom scroll, but no one ever wants to count that. Right. But all these things that we said were supposed to make our life better. 2 years old, today, I'm just a little bit busy. I'm tired. I don't want to get mad at my kid. So, and she's acting up a little bit. Let's just today only. Yeah. It's only once.
Yeah.
And then next time you're like, well, okay, it's dinner. It's important. We're out. There's people watching. Fine. Just swear only one more time.
Yeah. No good.
Next time it's like, here, kid.
Yeah.
No,
I think that I think we're going to discover down the road that there are enormous neurological ramifications for how the brain works, how the brain forms from early phone.
Isn't it almost exactly the same as we started this conversation as the previous boomer generation? It's their fault for the way that the people that are leading this generation now have become. Mm-hmm. And now that generation is using technology to raise their children, which is actually going further away. And we talk about how weak times creates hard times creates weak men, etc. There's no loop back then because we're using technology and actually it's going to go even further down the road.
Right.
Do we separate? Do we turn it off? Because without it, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be broadcasting. We wouldn't be having this conversation. People wouldn't be listening.
I'm not a Luddite. I don't think we ought to smash the technology, but I think that it's a wonderful, wonderful servant and a terrifying master. But it's wealth. Basically, think of it as the 2-year-old, that knows he's a rich kid, bossing around his nurse and his babysitter and throwing tantrums and stuff. That's the function of him not being trained to handle wealth. I don't have an objection to kids growing up in a home that's wired. I do have an objection where the technology is taken over and it's the master and the people are the slaves. That's the problem.
You have a pretty interesting way of running the schools here. It's a little bit different than how schools are run. And obviously, again, young daughter, we think about education all the time. Do we send them to a Christian school? Do we send her to public school? Do we send her to a more prestigious type of private school? Do we homeschool? And you've decided that you're going to create your own school, and you've did it in a very different model. Maybe you can explain that a little bit and why you chose that way.
Our schools are classical Christian schools, and I had read when I was in the Navy, I had read an article by Dorothy Sayers called "The Lost Tools of Learning," where she had an insight concerning the medieval trivium of grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric, and she mapped that onto 3 stages of child development. The Paul Parrott stage, the Pert stage, and the poetic stage. And when we started our school, we just wanted a Christian school, and we didn't want a fancy prep school that was just basically like the government school, only
richer
and with a chapel. Yeah. And we didn't want a fundamentalist reactionary academy either. And so we came up with the phrase classical and Christ-centered. Classical meant that it wasn't fundamentalist reactionary. Christ-centered meant it was going to be decidedly Christian. And I remembered that article that Dorothy Sayers had written. So we looked it up and we didn't know what we were doing. So we thought, well, this is worth a try. And so we implemented it. And it had spectacular results. As soon as we started seeing the points go up on the scoreboard with how the kids were doing and how they flourish in that setting, we thought, oh, this is a good thing. We need to push it along. So Logos School has been going for since 1981, 40 plus years. And ACCS, the Association of Classical Christian Schools, has hundreds of schools around the country now that follow this model. And it's a great books program. It's a Western heritage program. It's decidedly Christian. And the kids are top drawer. They get a good education.
And you teach them Latin.
They start Latin in third grade.
That is, I don't think anyone's doing that anymore these days. That's almost one of those things that they don't teach. Maybe a handful of schools will teach Latin, and then they'll tell, well, you should take Spanish or French. I don't know why anyone takes French, by the way. There's actually not a lot of value.
Unless you're going to West Africa.
But why Latin?
Latin, there are all sorts of reasons, but Latin is the foundation language for all the Romance languages. So just to take English is actually a Teutonic language, but with the genius of English is that it acquires vocabulary from other places. So 80% of English vocabulary, English has about 500,000 words in it. 80% of it is, 50% is Latin words, 30% Greek, and then the rest Anglo-Saxon and that sort of thing.
Made up words.
And in Romance languages, it's even a higher percentage. So if you were going to learn Spanish or Portuguese or Romanian or one of these Italian, Latin would be a good place to start. It's a great platform that enables you to go in any number of directions. And it really is a great blessing in English proficiency because if I say the Latin word dico means I speak or I tell, benediction, diction, dictionary, dictate, dictator, all comes from dico. So you learn one Latin word, and there's 10 or 15 English words that fall out from that. So this is just the pragmatic answer. If you have a kid who takes a couple of years of Latin in school, that's good for 100 points on the English portion of the SAT. Okay.
When I was kind of getting ready to come out here, and I said, I'm going to go see Pastor Doug Wilson, a word that came up was Calvinist, Pre-Destination. Yeah. These are two words that kind of circle around you a lot.
Yes.
And a lot of people have very difficulty with the idea of predestination because you get stuck in the idea of, well, we have free will. I'm allowed to do what I want. And other people, well, no, God has a plan. We're supposed to abide. It's really difficult for people to get along the idea of plan or purpose or this is what is supposed to happen or this is what's going to happen anyway versus your ability to freely choose the direction of your own life.
Right.
How do you find that intersection?
Okay. First, begin with the acknowledgement. This is a huge question. Many books have been written about it. So you're getting my short form summary of it. But if the question is posed, is it possible for us to thwart the will of God? Okay. The answer has to be yes and no. Okay. Because there are two different kinds of God, two different sorts of wills that God has. In 1 Thessalonians, this is God's will concerning you, that you avoid sexual immorality. The 10 Commandments are an expression of the will of God. It's God's will that we not steal. It's God's will that we not take his name in vain. It's God's will that we not covet. But people steal and take his name in vain and covet, so God's will can be thwarted. That's God's preceptive will, God's precepts. So when God says, don't do this, and we do it, we're violating his precepts. So God's will can be thwarted in that sense. But theologians also distinguish preceptive will from God's decretive will. Right? What God decrees is going to happen. And when God decrees that something's going to happen, it's going to happen, no matter what. No matter what. So a Calvinist, those are two different kinds of wills. A Calvinist is someone who believes that God's decretive will encompasses everything. So do I believe that before the world was created, God ordained the position and velocity of every atom in this wood floor at this moment? Yes. And I would point to things like Jesus saying the hairs of your head are all numbered. Not a sparrow falls to the ground apart from the will of the Father. When Jesus says that about sparrows, we're not invited to think, well, he wasn't talking about robins. No, he's trying to tell us that God ordains the number of hairs on the yellow dog's back at the end of the world. Everything is in God's control. Now, what people then do when they hear, if I say that into the microphone, which I guess I kind of just did.
Hello.
When I say that, people say, "Oh, you're saying that we're just puppets." Right. And I know I'm not saying that at all, because they think I'm saying God has a puppet here, and God says, "Puppet, here's my perceptive will. Don't go over here." And then he commands the perceptive will not to go over there, and then God's decretive will makes the puppet go over there, and then God says, "Bad puppet," and smashes the puppet. And we look at that and we say, "Man, I'm kind of with the puppet there." I feel that seems like God's an ogre.
It sounds like suffering.
All right, yeah. But this is the thing, and this is the category mistake that people make. When I'm managing a puppet, I and the puppet are in the same room. Okay. When God ordains, God is there, the fundamental category, the theological category we need to deal with this is called the creator-creature distinction. There is an infinite gulf between the creator and the creation. And it's like Shakespeare and Hamlet. So and there's a gulf between the playwright and the play. So when Hamlet gives his famous speech, to be or not to be, and does it make sense to point at that speech and say, how much of that speech was Hamlet and how much was Shakespeare? Was it 90-10? Was it 99-1? Was it 50-50? No, we'd say, no, I'm talking with two different categories. It's 100% Shakespeare and it's 100% Hamlet. It's all Hamlet. It's also all Shakespeare on another level. So did God write this scene before the foundation of the world? Did God write this scene? Did God determine that someone that was my next door neighbor for 3 months would circle back around through a weird series of events? Did God ordain all that? I would say obviously, plainly, clearly he did. Sometimes he lets us see that he's ordained it, but I think he's ordained everything, absolutely everything. So I look at that, and yet here we are freely talking. We're not puppets. There's no strings. The more Shakespeare writes, the more Hamlet can say. Now, someone's going to say, yes, but your analogy fails because Hamlet is a two-dimensional literary creation, and I'm a real being with hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Okay? I'm greater than Hamlet. But I've been using this illustration for many, many years, and no one has ever said, Doug, your illustration fails. God is much greater than Shakespeare. Well, the distance between Shakespeare and God is much, much greater than the distance between Hamlet and me. And so the question is, can God freely and unalterably write a scene in which I say certain things freely?
Because we're sitting here, I'm sitting here, we're having this conversation. I feel like I'm supposed to be here. I feel like there's a reason to be here. I feel like there's purpose. It was a purpose-driven endeavor to get here. Did I have a choice in being here?
Yes.
Could I not have been here? Because if we was predestined...
No. You could not have not been here, and you got here because you chose. Because one of the things that,
you got me in this circular mind.
Do we have that little blue?
I'm like dodging the bullets in the
that
Matrix.
Little blue computer circle.
Spinning. I'm spinning.
Here, God did not just ordain the result. He ordained the means that got to that result. So let's say I'm backing out of a driveway and I back into a telephone pole. And I dent my bumper. And I'm talking to my neighbor, and he said, "You're a Calvinist. Do you believe that bumper was God ordained that bumper to be dented before the foundation of the world?" I'd say, "Yeah." And suppose he then said, "So why'd you have to run into the pole then? Why didn't one day the bumper just go doink?" Well, because God didn't ordain that the bumper would be dented. He ordained that it would be dented as a result of running into the pole. God didn't just ordain that you would be here. He ordained that you would be here because of a series of free choices that you made. He ordained the choices too. So when Shakespeare writes the play, he's not just writing the speech for Hamlet. He's writing the choices of Hamlet, and Hamlet has choices because Shakespeare gave them to him. Now, we say, well, but that's limited because he's two-dimensional and fictional. Yes, but with God, there's an infinite gulf. It's not limited. So after I came into an understanding of Calvinism, I didn't feel one iota less free or responsible for the choices I make. I'm responsible for the choices I make. When I sin, I still have to confess the sin. It's me. I'm responsible to God. So God is in control, but not in a way that robs us of our liberty, the liberty or contingency of secondary causes, as the Westminster Confession puts it.
But there could be a lot of people that are very unhappy with their current situation in life, where they sit, and the idea that they're supposed to be there, it could rub people the wrong way. You could see that.
It depends on what it is they're dissatisfied with. So if they're dissatisfied with the fact that I wasn't the firstborn in my family, if you're dissatisfied with that, you need to stop arguing with God and thank him that you were the secondborn, because that's what he gave you. If someone said, I'm dissatisfied with being a boy or being a man, no, sorry, obey your chromosomes. Thank God for what he made you. If you are dissatisfied because you're out in the rain picking up rocks, I'd say, go inside, man. Stand by the fire. The Bible tells us what are the lawful choices for us to make. We can eat when we're hungry. We can drink when we're thirsty. We can seek a wife when we're lonely. We have all these lawful choices before us. There's certain things we don't have the authority to choose. I don't have the authority to choose to be born in another family. I don't have the authority to choose to be an archangel. I just have to take what God gives me and not fight that. That's what he ordains. But when it comes to the choices I'm going to make tomorrow, if it's a lawful choice, I should feel free to make it.
Kind of out there, but in thinking about things like predestination, a lot of people's minds goes towards alternate realities, to alternate forces beyond our control, which is wild. It's trending. A lot of people think about it. We probably talk about it all the time. Just because I think it's an interesting thought experiment. I don't know if we'll really know. But, aliens and extraterrestrials and different beings and different forces and different technologies and hidden technologies, all the stuff that our brains can barely comprehend. But people who study are like, well, it kind of makes sense. And you listen to them and you're like, okay, I can see that. Right? Multiple civilizations, previous civilizations. It goes forever.
Yes. And what I would argue is I believe that being a Calvinist and believing that predestination is a firm reality, but it's the predestination of a loving Father whom I know. I know my Father through Jesus Christ. He is the one who's ordained all things. If I deny the predestination of the Father, what the human heart sees there is a job opening. Predestination is an inescapable concept. It's not whether there's going to be predestination. It's who's doing the predestining, right? If you remove the Father as the sovereign God, the historic Christian God, if you remove him, then people are going to look to other predestinators, most commonly the state. So if God is not God of all, the state, if there is no God above the state, then the state becomes God. And the state wants to be omniscient, wants to have cameras at every intersection. They want to record every keystroke. What are they doing? They're aspiring to predestinating godhood. And then other people want that predestination to be alternative realities or aliens or, or spooky, spectral, spiritual forces. And what that tells me is that people have an innate appetite for some overarching plan, right? They don't want to be just random atoms banging around. They want a plan. They want there to be some sort of design to all this. The Calvinist says, yes, there is a design, and the design was the good purpose and will and counsel of our Almighty Father. And that's a place to rest. I don't want aliens. I don't want bureaucrats.
Kind of the same these days.
Yeah.
Both kind of out there.
Yeah.
All right. If we're closing up, I think a lot of the things that I think about, especially most recently, is purpose. Why, trying to understand why I'm in certain positions, how I get to certain places. It's constantly trying to figure that out, right? Like why? And people say, well, it's God. Okay, great. It's not that satisfying of an answer, actually, because it seems too easy of an answer. A lot of people, they need more clarity. How do you kind of gap the purpose and the why of people's missions?
Okay,
and how important is mission and purpose in people's lives?
So the fact that God ordains everything gives us the ground for figuring out our purpose, but it doesn't give you the purpose. So I know that God ordained this moment, but I don't know, and you don't know, all the ramifications, downstream consequences of this meeting. What's going to come from this? We don't know. So we trust God. This is why it goes back to our loving Father being the one who, like the hymn says, I know not what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. God is the one who holds the future. So when I was talking to your folks that all those years ago, neither they nor I had this moment in view. We did not know that this was going to happen, but it happened because of that. And God is going to bring good out of it. So I think it was Chekhov who said in talking about writing a short story or writing a novel, if someone props a shotgun by the mantle in the first pages of the story, that shotgun's got to come back into the story later on. You don't just randomly place things. At the Last Judgment, God, the master storyteller, is going to tie off every loose end, every detail, everything is going to be wrapped up. And all of the redeemed are going to, with one voice, say, that was the best story we ever heard.
I kind of want to know how the story ends, though. I think that's the curiosity in people.
Well, yeah, but that's the curiosity. But God says, no, I want you to walk by faith, not by sight. So I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to be alive tomorrow. I don't know that, James says in the Epistle of James, our lives are a mist. We don't know those things. The future is closed to us. And so we ought not to be confident, overconfident, proud with regard to the future. And so James says, come now, you who say we're going to go to this city and do business and make money. He says, you don't know that. You don't know that. What you can do is faithfully serve God in the present. You can look back at the past and see his handiwork on how he's brought you to this point. And you can trust him that he is tying together an amazing purpose, but it's trust. We're walking by faith. And one of the names that the Bible has for Christians is believers. I'm a believer. I believe that he is good. I believe that God is good all the time. I believe that God is sovereign all the time. I believe that God is not going to tell me what's going to come to pass 10 years from now, because frankly, between us, I couldn't handle it. Right? If God, why would God crush us with that kind of information? Right? We should trust him now.
I feel like because in what we're doing online, what I'm doing online, it's still in its infancy. I haven't been doing that long. Somehow I've gotten to where we are. And a lot of times I think, well, God has created this situation and put me in this place, which I'm grateful for and humbled by, and trying to do the best and learn every day.
Right.
Meet interesting people, have interesting conversations, widen my perspective on how I see, try to see it through a more logical, honest, genuine perspective. In doing so, you start seeing the effects of God within your work and what you're doing. At some point, what started as a secular endeavor, you start to see work of God throughout what you do. Mm-hmm. Do you continue to move in a secular fashion, or once you know that, are you required to move towards kind of a more right side?
Okay. I would say it depends on how you're defining the word secular. So there's an older Christian definition of secular, which is perfectly fine. Secular means bicycle repair, computer coding, podcasting. Those are all secular endeavors, meaning that they're not preaching sermons. It's not administering word and sacrament. It's not singing psalms in church. It's secular. But secular, in the older Christian definition, secular does not mean godless. Okay? So let's say, just to take an illustration, if your whole thing was sportscasting, right, and you reported on Major League Baseball, and God started doing something in your life, I think your vocation should still be Major League Baseball. That's what you're doing. And doesn't have to be Jesus all the time. But there'll be occasions when something pops up, and you shouldn't be ashamed of your faith when something pops up. Let's say there's a controversy with one of the players who confessed Christ, and there's an uproar.
A kicker who gives a graduation speech.
Yeah. A kicker who, what's his name? Butthurt? he hurt some feelings. He hurt some feelings. So when that pops up, your Christianity is there, is present, but you don't have to. I don't think that the fulfillment of the Great Commission or thinking Christianly about all things turns the world into one giant Sunday school. That's not what it's all about. I think it was Martin Luther who said, being a Christian cobbler doesn't mean making shoes with crosses on them. Being a Christian cobbler means making good shoes to the glory of God. So you should continue doing what you're doing, and to the extent that explicit faith issues come into it, like it's doing right now, let them come in. But there's no need to suddenly
become an evangelist.
It doesn't have to turn into Sunday school all the time.
It's the hard part, because once you start seeing, there's kind of a inherent desire to like, well, I feel like I'm supposed to, but you're not really supposed to, because the world doesn't need everyone. You need people somewhere speaking to the middle, right?
And I would say there's a difference between feeling like you're supposed to and feeling like you want to. One of the reasons podcasts take off is because somebody has something to say. And if you have something to say and you want to say it, then say it. But if you think, oh, I'm a Christian, and maybe is there a Bible verse somewhere that says I've got to say Jesus every 20th word? No, nothing like that.
Maybe we'll have a Jesus counter on the bottom from now on. Yeah. So every time we do it, like how many times you reference it? Because sometimes we talk about topics that would definitely not be in the realm of Christian.
Yeah.
But I think that's important too, just to challenge people's worldviews. Again, I think for me at least, it's important to encourage people to come to their own decisions and learn to think for themselves, separate themselves from this crazy matrix that we're served.
Right.
It's a wild world these days.
It's a wild world.
Well, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I think this is amazing. Yeah. We'll definitely leave links for everyone to go check out Pastor Doug Wilson and everything that he does. It's so much stuff out there. And I encourage people to come visit Moscow. It is amazing here. I never expected kind of the warm reception that we've gotten since we've gotten here. The community around here, how beautiful of a place this is.
It's gorgeous.
And somehow this has become the center mecca of good versus evil. You can feel it around. Can we just talk about that real quickly?
What's that?
The fight between good versus evil that's happening within this city, and how it seems to have kind of come together right here.
Yeah.
And everyone from all over the country who believe in what you're doing, they're starting to move here just to be closer to it.
Hundreds of people have moved here. And it's a weird thing because what's happening all across America started to happen here maybe 10 or 15 years earlier. So we were sort of the prototype of the cultural clashes that are happening elsewhere. So we're farther down the road with that. But I don't think anything fundamentally different is happening here. I just think we're farther along in it. And part of that has to do with how self-conscious we were about being Christian in education and being Christian in the arts and being Christian in our worship and so on.
If this place is 10 or 15 years ahead, meaning you can almost see the future of what America may eventually be, is there hope?
Yes, there's hope. But like I said earlier, not in politics, not in politicians. There's hope because we're Christians. G.K. Chesterton once said that Christianity has died many times. But he said, that's all right, because we serve a God who knows the way out of the grave.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.